I found the golden key taped under my grandfather's headstone on the anniversary of his death. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke, until I saw his initials carved into the back. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 34 years old, a mechanical engineer from Oregon, and until that Sunday morning, I didn't believe in riddles, legacies, or family curses. My grandfather, Henry Cole, had been a quiet man, a self-made millionaire who built his empire in manufacturing and real estate. When he passed away 2 years ago, the family gathered expecting a standard-will reading. What we got instead was chaos. The lawyer read his statement in a flat voice. My entire fortune, estimated at $500 million, will go to whoever finds the golden key. The room erupted. My cousins, business sharks in tailored suits, started arguing before the lawyer even finished the sentence. They demanded clues, maps, instructions, but there were none. Just that one sentence, followed by my grandfather's handwriting at the bottom. Find the key, and you'll find the truth. Within weeks, the family turned into a circus. My cousin Nathan hired professional treasure hunters. His sister, Claire, poured money into drones, excavation teams, and old property records. They tore apart every piece of land my grandfather had ever owned. Rumors spread. Some said the key was buried in one of his factories. Others believed it was hidden somewhere overseas. I didn't join them. I had no interest in chasing ghosts or fighting over money. My relationship with my grandfather had been simple. Every Sunday, I'd visit him at the nursing home. He never said much, but he'd always end our talks with the same phrase: patience reveals what greed never sees. After he died, I kept visiting his grave every week, just to keep that habit alive. I'd bring coffee, sit by the headstone, and talk to him like I used to. It felt strange, but peaceful. That Sunday, exactly 1 year since his passing, I reached under the marble edge to brush away the leaves. My fingers caught something taped underneath. A small golden key, wrapped in clear tape, gleaming faintly in the sunlight. My grandfather's initials, H.C., were engraved on the side. I knew right then the game wasn't about money. It was about a message he'd left only I was meant to find. I just didn't know yet how dangerous that message would become. I didn't tell anyone about the key. Not my cousins, not my mother, not even the lawyer who handled the estate. I slipped it into my pocket and drove home in silence, replaying that last Sunday I spent with my grandfather before he died. He'd looked weak, barely able to lift his hand, but his eyes were sharp. He'd said something strange that day, something I hadn't thought about until now. "Ethan," he'd whispered, "you'll know when the time comes. Don't dig for gold. Dig for truth." The next morning, I took the key to my workshop and cleaned off the dirt. It wasn't just gold-plated. It was real gold, solid and heavy, about the length of my thumb. The engraving was precise, almost mechanical. My grandfather had worked with precision tools his whole life. It looked like something he could have made himself. On one side were the letters H.C., and on the other, a date, 1969. That same day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single typed sentence: "The vault waits at Harbor National, Box 327. There was no signature, but attached was a small piece of embossed stationery I recognized. It was from my grandfather's office. Harbor National was an old bank downtown, one my grandfather had used for decades. When I arrived, the clerk looked surprised but eventually found the record. Box 327 had indeed been registered under Henry Cole, sealed upon his death, and labeled "Key required for access." The vault attendant led me to the lower level. The air was cold and metallic, the sound of distant machinery echoing off the concrete walls. When I inserted the golden key into the lock, it turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting. Inside was a single black case, slim and rectangular, with my name written across the lid in neat handwriting. I opened it expecting documents or maybe instructions. Instead, there was a manila folder, a small flash drive, and an old photograph. The photo was of my grandfather standing beside a man I'd never seen before. The two of them were shaking hands in front of a building with a government seal on the wall. Written on the back were 5 words in my grandfather's handwriting: "If I disappear, start here." I didn't know it yet, but the moment I read that message, the game stopped being a family riddle. It became a crime. I drove home with the case beside me on the passenger seat, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every turn in the rearview mirror felt suspicious, every car behind me a little too close. By the time I reached my apartment, my heart was pounding like I'd just left a crime scene instead of a bank. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and opened the folder. Inside were copies of old legal documents, stock certificates, and handwritten notes dated between 1968 and 1972. They referenced something called the Whitestone Project. My grandfather's name appeared repeatedly alongside the logo of a defense contractor, Argonne Systems. The documents were heavily redacted, black lines running through names and numbers. Still, I could tell it wasn't normal business. There were mentions of offshore accounts, untraceable payments, and coded transactions linked to the U.S. Department of Energy. The flash drive contained a single video file. It was dated 6 months before my grandfather's death. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. The video flickered to life, grainy, like it had been recorded on an old camcorder. My grandfather sat at his desk, thinner than I remembered, but with that same calm, measured voice. He said, "If you're watching this, it means you found the key. Good. That means you're not blinded by greed like the rest of them." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Ethan, I left something buried that the world was never meant to see. The Whitestone Project was a mistake, mine included. I can't undo what we built, but I can stop it from falling into the wrong hands. If they knew what was hidden, they'd tear this country apart to get it. Don't trust anyone, not even family." The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, frozen. My grandfather wasn't just rich. He was involved in something secret, something powerful enough to haunt him for 50 years. I thought about calling the police right then, but something in me said no. Not yet. I needed to know what Whitestone was, what he meant by what we built. The last page of the folder had a handwritten note attached, barely legible, but clear enough to read. The vault wasn't the end. It's the beginning. Follow the river. When I looked closer, I realized the paper wasn't just a note. It was a map, one that led straight to a place my grandfather had owned decades ago. A property on the outskirts of a small town called Stillwater. The next morning, I packed a duffel bag with essentials, printed the map, and started driving toward Stillwater. It was a quiet town tucked between pine forests and a wide river that cut through the valley. My grandfather had once owned a factory there, but it had been shut down long before I was born. I hadn't thought about that place in years, until now. The drive took most of the afternoon. The farther I went, the less civilization there was. Self-service faded somewhere past the county line. The sky was turning orange when I reached the edge of Stillwater and saw the sign for coal manufacturing, faded letters on a rusted steel gate. Behind it stood a sprawling complex of warehouses and machinery swallowed by vines. I parked outside the fence and slipped through a broken section. The air smelled of rust and river water. Everything was silent except for the steady hum of insects. My grandfather's note said, "Follow the river." From the map, it looked like one of the warehouses sat right on the riverbank. I headed there first. Inside, the floor was covered in dust thick enough to show my footprints. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating rows of abandoned equipment. At the far end, I found a hatch partially covered by a collapsed beam. It looked like an access tunnel. I cleared the debris and pried it open. A cold draft rose from below. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness as I descended the narrow staircase. The air was damp, the walls made of smooth concrete. After 20 or 30 steps, the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber. In the center stood a large metal crate marked with the Argonne Systems logo, the same company from the documents in the folder. There was another golden symbol etched into the lid, identical to the key I'd found under the headstone. My hands were shaking as I unlatched it. Inside was a sealed envelope and an old security badge. The name on the badge wasn't my grandfather's, it was someone else's. Dr. Alan Mercer, Project Director, the Whitestone Initiative. The envelope contained a letter dated 1971. The first line read, "If this reaches you, the experiment failed." I stood frozen, the words echoing in the dark. Whatever the Whitestone Project was, it hadn't just been secret. It had been dangerous enough to bury, and somehow, my grandfather had kept it hidden for over 50 years. The letter inside that crate was handwritten, its edges yellowed and brittle. I unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The ink was fading, but the words were still legible. If this reaches you, it means Whitestone is compromised. The containment has failed. Do not attempt to recover the material. Destroy the site immediately. It was signed by Dr. Alan Mercer. I kept reading. The next paragraph stopped me cold. Henry Cole has agreed to conceal the final chamber beneath his Stillwater facility until proper disposal can occur. This action violates protocol, but it is our only chance to contain the spread. My grandfather's name. In black and white. I sat there for a moment, trying to process it. My grandfather hadn't been hiding treasure. He'd been hiding something dangerous. Something called the material. The next lines were fragmented, but I could make out a few chilling words. Unstable, radiation, biological, classified. The envelope also contained a small map drawn in pencil. It marked a secondary location deeper along the river, labeled simply Lower Chamber. The same golden symbol, the one from the key, was scrawled beside it. I shoved everything back into the crate and climbed out of the tunnel. The air outside felt different, heavier. I could feel the weight of what I'd just uncovered pressing on my chest. My grandfather hadn't left me a fortune. He'd left me a warning wrapped in inheritance papers. It was dark by the time I reached my car. My phone buzzed the moment I started the engine. No caller ID. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. A man's voice came through, calm but firm. "Mr. Cole," he said, "we need to talk about what you found in Stillwater." I froze. He didn't introduce himself, didn't say how he got my number. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said quietly. He paused. Then came the sound of paper shuffling on the other end. "You have something that belongs to us. The key, the files, the footage. Return them, and this ends cleanly." Before I could respond, the line went dead. For the first time, I realized the truth. I wasn't just chasing a secret anymore. I was being hunted for it. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for hours, switching roads, doubling back, checking every car in my mirrors. My grandfather's warning echoed in my head. Don't trust anyone, not even family. The man on the phone had known too much. The question was how. By sunrise, I reached a motel off the interstate and paid in cash. I locked myself inside, closed the curtains, and laid everything out on the bed. The key, the letter, the badge, the folder from the bank. I needed to piece it together before someone else did. I connected my laptop to the flash drive again, hoping I'd missed something. This time, a second file appeared. Hidden. It was encrypted, but my grandfather had taught me the basics of ciphers when I was a kid. After an hour of decoding, the file opened to reveal a single image. A blueprint labeled Whitestone Containment Structure, Lower Chamber. It wasn't just a building. It was a bunker buried deep beneath the Stillwater riverbank. The structure was circular, reinforced with steel, and designed to hold something volatile. At the bottom of the image was a signature, Dr. Alan Mercer's again, with a small handwritten note beside it. Containment holds, but only as long as the key remains separate. That was when I realized what the golden key really was. It wasn't a symbol of inheritance. It was a part of the containment system. Whatever was sealed beneath Stillwater had been locked using that key. Removing it might have weakened the barrier. I felt sick. My grandfather hadn't hidden the key for greed or mystery. He'd hidden it to keep something dangerous from waking up. And I'd just undone his work. I packed everything into my bag and left the motel. My only goal now was to reach the river before anyone else did. The map from the crate showed the lower chamber about half a mile downstream, accessible through a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the factory. By the time I reached Stillwater again, the sun had set. The factory loomed against the skyline, half lit by the moon. My phone buzzed once more. No number, same message as before. "We're already here." For a long moment, I stood in the silence, feeling the weight of the key in my pocket. Then I stepped forward, toward the riverbank, knowing that whatever waited for me underground wasn't just part of my grandfather's secret. It was about to become mine. The path along the river was barely visible in the dark. The fog hung low, heavy with the smell of damp soil and rust. I moved quietly, flashlight off, guided only by the faint glow of the moon. The old maintenance tunnel entrance was exactly where the map said it would be, half buried in reeds and mud. The metal door was warped, but a few hard pulls loosened it. I slipped inside, closing it behind me. The tunnel stretched deep under the ground, the air thick and stale. My boots echoed softly against the concrete floor. Every few steps, I passed old warning signs: radiation, restricted area, no entry without authorization. They were decades old, but the message was clear. Whatever had been sealed down here was never meant to be disturbed. Halfway through, I saw the first sign that someone else had beaten me there, a flashlight beam flickering in the distance. I froze, crouched behind a support pillar, and waited. Voices. 2 of them. Male, steady, professional. The kind of tone that came from people who'd done this before. One said, "The chamber's ahead. The lock's already disengaged." The other replied, "Good. Retrieve the core and burn the rest." Core. The word hit me like a punch. They weren't treasure hunters. They were cleanup. Whoever these men were, they knew exactly what the Whitestone Project had hidden. And they weren't here to study it. They were here to erase it. I followed at a distance as they reached the end of the tunnel. The door to the lower chamber was built like a vault, its edges sealed with rust. A circular indentation sat in the center of the door, the exact size and shape of the golden key. My stomach twisted. They didn't have it. I did. One of the men cursed quietly. "It's not here," he said. The other answered, "Then find whoever has it." Before I could move, one of them turned and shone a light straight down the tunnel. It caught the edge of my jacket. I bolted. The sound of boots pounded behind me, metal clanging against concrete. I ducked into a side corridor, lungs burning, and killed my flashlight. The darkness swallowed me whole. When the footsteps faded, I finally pulled the key from my pocket and stared at it in the dim light leaking from the cracks above. My grandfather had hidden it for 50 years to keep it away from men like them. And now, whether I wanted it or not, I was the last one standing between whatever was in that chamber and the people trying to unleash it. I stayed hidden in the dark for nearly an hour, listening. The men searched the tunnels, their footsteps echoing closer, then fading again. I could hear the click of radios, the metallic clang of tools, the sound of urgency. They didn't have much time, and neither did I. Whatever they were after, they were willing to kill for it. When silence finally settled, I slipped out of the corridor and headed back toward the lower chamber. My flashlight beam caught the door again, the massive steel vault with the circular indentation. The surface was marked with symbols that looked almost burned into the metal, like heat had warped it once before. The phrase "Project Whitestone" was faintly visible above the locking mechanism. I pressed the golden key against the slot, hesitating. Every instinct screamed not to, but my grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "You'll know when the time comes." The key fit perfectly. I turned it. A deep mechanical sound rolled through the chamber like thunder. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then came the hiss of pressure releasing, the groan of steel shifting after half a century. The door cracked open an inch, then stopped. Inside was darkness, thick, heavy still. I pushed it open just enough to slip through. The chamber beyond was circular, lined with reinforced glass panels and old control terminals coated in rust. In the center, surrounded by a web of cables, stood a cylindrical container the size of a small car. It wasn't empty. Through the glass, faint blue light pulsed from within, slow, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The air felt electric, humming against my skin. I took a cautious step closer and realized what I was seeing. It wasn't machinery. It was organic. The thing inside looked alive. A faint beeping sound broke through the silence. One of the control panels lit up on its own. Lines of data flickered across the screen, followed by a single word: containment breach. I stumbled backward just as the overhead lights flared to life. A recorded voice filled the room, calm but urgent. Warning: Whitestone core instability detected. Evacuation required. Before I could move, I heard shouting in the tunnel. Those same men, running toward me. I turned, slammed the vault door shut, and twisted the key back in place. The lock sealed with a deep metallic clang. For a moment, everything went still. Then, from behind the door, came the sound of something moving, slow, deliberate, and alive. The sound from behind the vault was subtle at first, like the scrape of metal against stone, but it carried a weight that made my skin crawl. I didn't wait to see what came next. I turned and ran, flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted back through the tunnels. The voices of the men were closer now. They'd heard the alarm too. When I reached the junction, I saw one of them ahead of me. He spotted me instantly, lifted his weapon, and shouted for me to stop. I dove behind a rusted support beam just as the first shot echoed through the corridor. Sparks burst off the wall inches from my head. The entire tunnel vibrated with the sound. I bolted down the side passage, lungs burning, until I saw daylight seeping through a service grate above. I climbed, forcing it open, and emerged near the riverbank just as the alarm below shifted pitch. It wasn't just warning anymore. It was a low, resonant tone that seemed to hum through the ground itself. From the factory behind me, the power lines flickered, then went dead. The earth beneath my feet trembled. A wave of cold air rolled up from the tunnels, carrying the faint scent of ozone. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the woods. When I did, I saw the impossible, blue light pulsing faintly through the cracks in the factory walls, spreading like veins of lightning under the concrete. It wasn't fire. It wasn't electricity. It was something else. Something alive. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. Somewhere around midnight, I pulled into a deserted rest stop and tried to breathe. My phone vibrated once more. No number. No voice this time, just a recording. It was my grandfather. His voice was weaker, slower, but unmistakable. He said, "If you're hearing this, the seal is broken. I failed to keep it buried, but you don't have to. There's still a way to contain it. The river runs through the veins of the facility. Cut the flow, and you cut the source. Do it before they do, or it won't matter who inherits anything." The message ended. I stared out the windshield, the words replaying in my head. Cut the flow. I checked the map again. The river intake for the factory ran just half a mile upstream, a control station my grandfather must have built decades ago. I started the engine, the golden key glinting faintly in the passenger seat beside me. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew one thing for certain. If my grandfather had spent his life trying to contain it, then letting it out was never an option. I reached the control station just before dawn. The sky over Stillwater was gray, the river swollen from last night's storm. The small brick building sat half-buried against the bank, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under years of neglect. I left the truck hidden behind a thicket of trees and made my way inside. The interior smelled of rust and stagnant water. Machinery lined the walls, massive pumps, levers, and rusted valves. In the center stood the main control console, covered in dust. A plaque bolted to the front read Coal Water Management, 1971. My grandfather had built it himself. The system ran on analog power. Manual. Old school. That was his style. Simple, mechanical, hard to hack. A small control box sat beside the console with a familiar shape carved into it. A circular indentation, the same as the vault. The same as the key. I hesitated, listening. Outside, the river groaned against the walls, waves slapping harder as the current grew restless. In the distance, faint sirens wailed. They were coming for me. Those men, the cleanup crew, maybe even someone higher. I slid the golden key into the slot and turned. The machine shuddered to life, dials spinning, lights flickering dimly to green. Then the hum started, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The main gauge read Flow Regulation, Active. I switched the lever to Manual Override. A red light blinked once. Then the system asked for confirmation. For a moment, I stared at the river through the cracked window. The surface shimmered faintly with the same unnatural glow I'd seen leaking from the factory. It wasn't just in the tunnels anymore. The contamination had spread into the water. I pulled the final lever. The pump screamed as the system reversed pressure. Valves burst one by one, releasing jets of steam. The entire building shook as the intake gates sealed shut, cutting the river's flow into the facility. The noise outside grew louder, a deep rumble, then silence. I stepped out just as the first rays of sunlight broke over the trees. The blue light beneath the surface dimmed, fading until the river looked like water again. In the distance, the factory was quiet. No glow, no tremor, no sound. The hum that had haunted me for days was gone. I threw the golden key into the water and watched it sink, disappearing beneath the current. By noon, I was back on the road. No one would ever believe what had happened in Stillwater, and that was fine. Some legacies weren't meant to be inherited. Some secrets were meant to be buried, and this one finally was. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.